Hey everyone, this is Vegan Theology episode 4. This is Kevin.
Yay.
Hey, yeah. Woo.
Hello, and I'm Sarah.
Hey.
Good to be here with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So we just want to cover some ground, kind of continue what we've been talking about. In episode 1, we talked about how our creation story in the Judeo-Christian Bible does not include a battle myth or a combat myth, that it's very peaceful, it's very nonviolent, as compared to some of the ancient Near Eastern creation myths like Anu and Elish and others. And then episode 2, we talked about how animals and humans are made of the same substance. And so you can't say animal doesn't have a soul. You can, but if you do, then that also means humans don't have souls either. And we use the word breath. We talked about nefesh haya. And in a lot of ancient Near Eastern understandings, breath also means spirit and sometimes soul. So it's probably where we get it, the idea of a soul and spirit from that word. At any rate, humans and animals are the same. And the only thing that differentiates humans and animals in terms of substance is that humans are made in the image of God. And so in episode 3, we said that the image of God may not necessarily be some kind of spiritual or ethical ability or rational ability that humans possess, but really it's more of a title and a function of royalty, and that God has given us. He's made us all image bearers, which in the ancient Near Eastern cultures, the only people in other cultures who really had the image of God were kings and or priests, clerical people. So the fact that every human is made in the image of God sets us apart, and in that sense, God has made all of us viceroys, representatives of Him on this earth. And so our job, which we're going to try to get into a little bit more today, we're going to pretty much describe 5 Hebrew words that work in conjunction with the whole concept of the image of God, specifically the words rule and subdue that we see in Genesis 1:28. We also see, I think we see rule in 1:26. And then in Genesis 2:15, we have the words where God sets man's job function, so to speak, to cultivate and keep the garden. So we'll talk about those words. And then we also want to talk about the word fill, I think in 1:28 as well. And then Sarah, you might do a comparison between the word rule in Genesis 1:28 compared to Genesis 3:16. Genesis
in
3,
the curse,
yes, in the curse, where
the word rule is used, but it's a different
word.
We translate it as the same, but it's a different verb in the Hebrew.
Yeah, it's a different Hebrew word. So that's where we're headed. So.
And I noticed that, I'm sure some of our listeners may have noticed, Kevin, that you did not use the word dominion as one of the words we're going to tackle. That's just because some of our English translations have used the word dominion as their English word for the word rule.
For the word rule, like the King
Radah.
James. Yeah, King James does that.
So the Hebrew word is radah, and you can faithfully translate that, I think, either way, as to rule or to have dominion. If you're looking in your NIV Concordance, that's number 8097 radah. So KJV and NRSV and probably a few others use the word dominion, and that's definitely become part of our Christian
tradition,
vernacular, and our little, it's definitely influenced. It's had a strong. In fact, if I could just go ahead and say, like, there's a documentary narrated by Joaquin Phoenix that reveals how we're treating animals on this planet, and they chose to title that documentary Dominion, because it's our understanding. Our historical Christian understanding of the word to rule over, to have dominion, has been so corrupted that we were completely mistreating our fellow creatures. So something that you might want to look at is that documentary.
And I also think I just want to say, in terms of, and this is just a little aside, but in terms of fighting over translations, and some people want to say one translation is better than another, maybe. But you can always get to the tools. You can always get a concordance. You can always get a Bible dictionary. You can get to the root word, the root Hebrew word, or the Aramaic word, or the Greek word. So you can spend your time fighting about translations, or you can just get the tools.
Get under the hood a little bit.
Yeah, get under the hood a little bit. There you go.
Yeah, and of course we don't have the autographs, but we use the best we have.
We don't have the original autographs, correct.
Yeah. Okay, so let's read from the text, Genesis chapter 1. We'll go ahead and start in verse 26, just to back up a couple of verses. And this is, again, kind of focusing on, this is just to tie into the context that we are still talking about humans being made in the image of God.
What translation are you using?
And I'm reading from the NIV currently. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish. So there's that word, radah, rule, over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. 27. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And 28. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground.
Nice.
So in that verse, chapter 1, verse 28, we hear the words fill, subdue, and rule. Oh, so fill and subdue the earth and rule over the creatures, the non-human creatures.
And if you wanted to follow along, if you the NIVEC number for subdue is 3899. The NIVEC number for rule is 8097. The NIVEC number for fill is 4848. We will also get into basically the words take care of and...
Yeah, let me just read that. Now, it's just one verse. So the second creation story is in Genesis 2. And if you focus in on verse 15, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden and the NIV translates it, work it and take care of it.
Right.
Other translations will say cultivate it and care for it. But yeah.
And so the NIVEC number for work is 6268, and the NIVEC number for kind of take care of, or some of the words, they're different words, but that are rendered. Some are to guard. Anyway, to take care of, it's the NIVEC number is 9068.
Lots of words.
Okay, so we're going to just kind of pull some meaning out of these dictionaries. And for the word subdue in NIDOTTE, which is the New International Dictionary of Old Testament Theology and Exegesis, edited by Willam, VanGemeren. For subdue, it kind of says, it points to rule, but I will say Sandra Richter, she's an Old Testament scholar, and I do appreciate her contributions. For the word subdue, she translates it as take possession of, which I think is going to be a good word in our context of being image bearers. But for rule, pulling out of NIDOTTE, Genesis 1:26-28, it occurs with a positive meaning when it is stated that humanity, created in God's own image, should subdue the earth and rule over it, rule over all the animals. Humankind is given the responsibility for God's creation, as is evident from the fact that his command to them is part of his blessing. And so we're going to get into that a little bit, but I think we just want to read these words, pull some meaning out of these dictionaries, or we could talk about it now. What do you want to do?
Well, I mean, what stuck out to me is, be responsible for, and what did you say Richter says?
She says for the word subdue, take possession of.
Almost like, okay, this is your domain now.
Right.
You're responsible for this domain now.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, we could get into that. I kind of want to get the whole context of all the words, but essentially I was thinking about that too in terms of taking possession. If you own something, you wouldn't treat it poorly, right? If it's your possession, maybe your property, if you want to think about it that way, it's your responsibility.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it's God's possession, and God has given you responsibility over it. So, and that gets into another idea, which we'll get to in a moment, regarding God's suzerainty, potential suzerainty treaty with us and with Adam.
Okay.
So,
I mean, I think the fact that it says, this word rule is a very positive word. It's kind of like, it has a sense of like, get excited, get enthusiastic about being creative.
Right.
And like get creative to create good things.
Right.
It's like this freedom to be like, okay, God has revealed God's character. God has revealed how God cares for creation. And now God's passing the baton to us.
Right. And I think that gets into some of what we're going to talk about in future episodes, is this concept. John Walton in his Genesis commentary speaks about form and function, and how we as image bearers have certain jobs and functions to fulfill God's creative purposes, meaning that we are co-creators. God has created this universe, and now he has handed over the baton to us to continue to build civilization, spread the Garden of Eden, which, by the way, there's a whole, we'll get into this too down the road, but many biblical scholars are starting to see Eden as a sanctuary, as a temple. And so our job as image bearers is actually to spread Eden across the planet.
Would now be a good time to contrast it with the rule in the curse, or you want to just stay with the chapter 1 first?
If you want to, sure. Go for it.
Because, like we said, it's the English is using the word rule in both situations for the way God blesses humans before the fall and says it's your responsibility, compared to after the fall in chapter 3, verse 16, as God is explaining the curse that is now going to take over. And so 3:16, to the woman he said, I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. And that is not the word radah. It's the word mashal. And this has a much more negative meaning. It says negatively, it refers to the abuse of power and control by a human being. And so this word has a much more negative feeling to it, that it's you have to subsume someone else to your will. It's kind of like, it just reminds me of like the peace that a government sometimes brings is like a piece of force. It's a piece of subjugation. It's a piece of squashing resistance and squashing freedoms. That's kind of like the rule that's in the curse, that's described in the curse. Right. And it's a very different sense of a word when God blesses and says, you get to rule my creation, and you get to be creative and rule the way, like we've already said, you get to represent me on this planet.
Right, and God has already modeled how he wants his creation to be managed, and we're to do it the way he has already showed us, with abundance, without competition, without violence, in a very peaceful, loving way. And so another word that is in that Genesis 1:28 is the word fill. And it says, that we are to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. And that includes the fish and the animals and us, basically. And the idea is that we're spreading the Garden of Eden, really, across the planet. And so, interestingly, the word fill has several meanings, but a couple of them that are interesting to me. One is to be full. One is to complete, finish, fulfill, perform, carry out. And when you think about that, especially in the context of kind of what I was alluding to earlier, again, Sandra Richter talks about this idea of a suzerainty treaty. And the whole concept of a suzerainty treaty is that there's a suzerain, a master, that would be God, and there's a vassal or a servant, that would be humankind, made in the image of God. And there's this sense of obligation, and there's also this land grant. So God has given Eden over to us, and we are to be caretakers, and we have, in some ways, an obligation to him. And so with that idea of completing or fulfilling the task, especially as we'll get into in future episodes, this concept of form and function, and also the idea of something I alluded to last episode was the idea of chaos and cosmos. And our jobs are to actually bring order and not chaos. Our jobs are to bring cosmos or order to the earth. And so with that in mind, if you think about how the treatment of animals goes today, the slaughtering of animals, that's a very chaotic situation. The fact that we're killing them, and it's obvious they don't want to be killed, that they're fighting for their lives, that they're in fear, that is not spreading order. That is not spreading cosmos. That is spreading chaos. And so these are just ideas that we're going to be getting to in the future episodes.
Yeah, and then one of the words in Genesis 2:15, to take care. God put us here to take, or God put man in the garden to take care of it. That's shamar. That's translated as to revere and to be careful. And it says in the dictionary, one of Adam's first responsibilities was to be responsible, shamar, for the garden in which his creator had placed him. So again, responsibility.
Right. Yeah, and that's very interesting, that word. Sandra Richter also translates that word you just said as to guard. Yeah, so the other word that we see is to till the land, or to work the land, or
cultivate.
To cultivate is some translations. It's actually the Hebrew word work. And what's interesting, again, about this word in this dictionary, some ideas are work, perform, serve, worship. Another part of the entry for the word work in this dictionary says, Genesis 2:5 indicates clearly that one of the purposes for the creation of Adam, humankind, was to till the ground before the fall. So it was always God's design that humans would work the ground the Lord God had created in Eden, an inherent religious act when done to fulfill the Creator's purposes. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah. So, I mean, like with all of these words, what keeps coming up are words like revere, take care of, guard, be responsible for.
Worship, serve.
Serve, yeah. Unfortunately, I don't think I'm alone when I say that is not the way we typically hear this passage preached or taught. It's more like in our vernacular, or when we talk about how we treat creation, and everybody's first reaction is, "Oh, God gave us dominion. We can do whatever we want."
Right.
And that's just not there in the text. I feel like, once again, I think we've been so polluted by Greek thought that the world doesn't matter, the material doesn't matter. We're gonna escape here.
God's gonna clean it up.
Which again, it's the idea even of escape this present reality is a very Greek thing. It's not a Hebrew idea at all. So again, I think if you just look at the text and read the text and give it its due, I think it's a very different sense than the way we have typically understood it. And lots of times when people defend eating animals, for example, or animal agriculture, they refer to this verse that we've been referring to, Genesis 1:28. Subdue it, rule over it, have dominion over it. Well, the very next verse in the Bible is Genesis 1:29, where God says, "Oh, and by the way, I give you all seed-bearing plants on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food." Genesis 1:30, next verse. "And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds in the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. So to defend eating animals, to defend animal agriculture with this verse about dominion and rule over and subdue, to defend what we're doing on this planet with animals, with Genesis 1:28, and then completely ignore Genesis 1:29 and Genesis 1:30 that says, "Oh, by the way, what I've given you for food is the plants."
Right.
So clearly the kind of dominion that God has in mind, or the kind of rule that God has in mind, does not include, raising, breeding, creating these animals for us to
slaughter them,
to commodify them, and
kill them and eat them. So that was not his intention, and I think as we'll continue on, we'll see how animals are in some ways friends, companions.
Yeah.
So.
And I guess when I was thinking about this episode, I was just thinking about kind of the metaphor. When you leave your kids with a babysitter, or with your parents, or with a nanny, you're not saying, "Oh, babysitter, I hired you, and you are all I care about, and you can do whatever you want with my kids. Do whatever you want. I don't care."
Right.
Or if you hire a security guard to guard your earthly treasures, you're not saying, "Oh, security guard, you're all I care about. Do whatever you want to my earthly treasures. You can destroy them. You can ruin them, whatever.
Sell them."
Yeah. Or if you hire a financial advisor to help you with your wealth, it's not your financial advisor that is all you care about.
Right.
And you're not saying to them, "Oh, and by the way, my wealth I don't care about. Do whatever you want to it." So in the same way, God makes us responsible. God hands the baton to us and says, here, you take care of my very good creation. And somehow we've twisted it to be, oh, all God cares about is us.
Right.
And we can do whatever the heck we want.
We're the pinnacle of creation.
Yeah. We can do whatever we want with impunity to all of God's good creation. That's how we've really lived and understood it. And that's how it's been taught in the church. I grew up and it was explicitly taught to me. People who care about the ozone layer and the whales and the rainforest, those are not followers of Christ, because all we care about is other people and other people's souls.
Yeah, saving souls.
Yeah. Again, if you look at the text and you really give it its due, God is saying, here's my very good creation, and I'm letting you be responsible for it. Represent me.
Right. And as we'll get to in further episodes, at the end of the day, in the eternal state, we are going to be on the new creation in real bodies, material bodies. So just something to think about. If we know what the goal is going to be, then maybe we should start being caretakers now of the creation we currently have in practice or in preparation for the new creation, and start doing it the way we were supposed to be doing it to begin with. Food for thought. Thanks for bearing with us with all the words, 5 or 6 Hebrew words there. And we will continue on next week.
Yeah.
All right. Take care.
More
See
to come. Bye-bye.